Hello, my name is Michael Nolan. Today we're going to talk about strategic planning and planning your company's profitability and growth. The outline of today's program is carry out strategic planning through internal analysis. That means looking at inside your company at where you're strong and where you're weak under the different processes of the business. And then we're going to look at the external analysis. That means looking at the competition, looking at the customers, and the overall environment you're operating in. From that, we will do a SWOT analysis. That stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. From there, we will develop a mission statement on what is the core business of the company, what is it trying to achieve over the next 10 years, and then a more short-term objectives of what it's trying to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years. Then we'll define the strategies. They're the ones that will tell us how we're going to achieve our objectives, and we will look at them in terms of what's the best way to approach it. And then finally, it's about implementing with action plans. That means integrating your action plans into the objectives. So, let us start looking at that. So what's the strategic planning cycle? Well, if we look at the chart here, we see it's in a circle first of all, so that there's a continuous movement around the whole board. We start with the blue area here, review existing mission, objectives, and strategies. If you've done a business plan before, it's a matter of reviewing this and seeing what you've done well, what you've done not so well, where it can be improved. If you haven't done one before, well, you don't have to go through this part of the process this time. However, when you're doing it again, you will have to review what you have done. Then we have the internal analysis, as I said before, looking at the company and where it's strong, where it's weak. Looking at the external analysis then in terms of the competition, suppliers, customers, the environment you're in. And then doing the SWOT analysis for the strengths, the weaknesses of the internal analysis, the opportunities and the threats from the external analysis. With that information, we then work towards the mission, then the objectives, what are the short-term objectives of the business, and what are the strategies to achieve the business, the way you're going to do it, and then finally the implementation. So let's look at each of those individually. Review. You carry out review, as I said, of the mission statement first of all. A mission statement, we say, should last about 8-10 years. So it shouldn't need too much modification after 3 or 4, but it's worth reviewing it, seeing if the business has changed and if it needs updating. Other than that, you will leave it as it is. Objectives. So what are the objectives that you had last year? Did you achieve those objectives? Where did you get ahead of the objectives? Where did you fall behind? Why did you fall behind? Also, why did you go ahead? Because if you went ahead and did better than you thought you'd do, what are the reasons for that as well? Because that can give you insights into how to improve even further in that area. And then the strategies. Were they appropriate for the business? Were they ones that worked for you? If not, why didn't they work? And so forth. So, let us now look at the internal analysis framework and what that looks like. You can see from the chart there are 5 elements to it. There's the management audit, the marketing audit, financial audit, operations audit, and R&D audit. They're all the main functions of the business. There are other functions you could put in if you wanted to, but they're the main ones. So looking at those individually, we'll start with marketing. The first one then is marketing analysis. That is about looking at what is happening in the market. Are there changes in technology? Is the market expanding? Is it contracting? Is there increased competition in the market? You're looking at all of those aspects and a lot more. Then in marketing strategy, you're looking at what strategy did we have and did it work? And was it appropriate? And all of those sort of things. Then the sales analysis, that's where you look at your sales per customer by product and you see, is there, for example, products that we're making that are not being sold many of anymore, so maybe they're not appropriate to keep on next year. Customers the same. Is there customers we're selling very little to? And should we keep it up? Is it too much trouble? And then we have operations. In the operations side, there's a number of areas. We'll start off with quality systems, first of all. And in quality systems, you're talking about the standards you have to make sure that you're making good products. What are the systems in place? Are they robust enough? Do you have quality problems? Are they in particular areas? Are you looking at why they're occurring to get to what we call is the root cause analysis of the problem? In production then, how good is your production system? And where are you in terms of technology of that production system? Is it good enough? Then we have product development. With product development, you're talking about developing R&D for new products, you're talking about innovation, all of those areas. If you're not making new products, your customers may get tired of your products and therefore move on to somebody else. So it's important to be up to date with those and to make sure that your products are good by developing new ones all the time. You'll also be looking at the lifespan of your products. Are they reaching the end of the lifespan and need renewing? Logistics, that's the next area. So with logistics, you have what's the incoming traffic like from suppliers? Are they delivering their products on time? Is the quality right for them? And you're looking at areas like that and how good are they at that? In turn then, when you're sending your products to customers, are they on time? Are they of the right quality? Is the systems there in place? Where can they be improved? Then you come to plant layout. Plant layout is the factory layout of the machines. That may have grown over time as you have got new machines in. So is it at the appropriate level? Can we say that the plant layout is ideal and if we were starting again, we would keep the same layout? If that is not the case, then you need to review the plant layout and see where can it be improved. And finally, technology. Has the technology moved on and have we moved on with it? That's what you have to ask yourself. So looking at the technology, you're seeing what's happening out in the world in terms of other companies and what they're using and machine makers and what they're saying they have developed over time. Because sometimes if you move into new technology early, you can get an edge on the competition. And so it's a matter of working with that and seeing how we can improve things. With all of these areas, it's a matter of looking what are the strengths and the weaknesses. Finally, here we have finance, and there are 5 elements to finance. First of all, ratio analysis. What is the ratio analysis you're doing on the company? That'll also be covered under the finance module of the lessons here. And if you've done that over time, you can see trends coming out, where your company is good or where it's not so good. And it helps to focus in on what improvements need to be made. Financial records. Are they up to date? Is there a robust system in place? Are they giving you the management information that you need to run the business well? If they're not, well then they need to be updated too. Cash flow. Cash flow is like the lifeblood of an organization. It's running through the veins. Without it, you die. So you have to look after your cash very well. It's an area which needs handling all the time. Costings. Are your costings up to date? Have they fallen behind over time as costs have changed and you haven't updated them? Is the system of costing good enough? How accurate is your costing system to the actual costs? Have you looked at the comparison and seen, is it good enough? Is it not? And then finally, investment. Like in technology in the operations slide, investment is about putting money into new things. It might be products, it might be systems, it could be machinery, it could be R&D, or it could be management information systems to improve the overall business. And then we come to management. Human resource management there is the first one, and it's about managing your people. Remember, it's easy to get people to come into the factory or into the office, but get them to come in with their brains. Particularly factory workers, we undervalue them in terms of what they can bring in knowledge. So not just their hands, but their heads as well. Have we got appropriate hiring systems? Do we know how to keep employees as well and how to keep them happy? And how to hire the right ones so that we have less problems in the workforce. The management structure, is it at an appropriate level? Does it work for the company? Does it need to be updated? Has the management system changed that the structure needs to change as well? And what about owner-managers? If the owners and the managers are the same people, as they are in many small businesses, that's fine. But if they're not, if it's a professional management, are management and owners on the same wavelength? Have they got the same objectives? If they haven't, there'll be conflicts and they need to be resolved. And finally, strategic. Does the management team act strategically in all it's doing? Well, if you're looking at a business plan, there's a certain element of strategy involved in that, and that's good. But it has to go way beyond that. So it's an area worth looking at. R&D. R&D processes. What processes do you have in place for managing R&D? And how well are they working? Product life planning. What product life planning do you have in place? Is there, for example, a life cycle of 5 years for your products, 3 years, or maybe it's only 6 months? But for some companies, this may not be as appropriate as others. For example, if you make products for other companies, you just do whatever you're asked to do, so you don't have to manage the life cycle of that. The next one then is external linkages. And what linkages do you have with other institutes, for example, universities and R&D companies, or other people working in this field who might be buying and selling innovation, products or process innovation? So linkages there are very important. The R&D budget finally. Are products made on time? Are they made within budget? And that tells a lot. So is there an R&D budget and how well does it work? So having looked at the internal analysis, we're now going to go into the external analysis and see what's happening in the greater world there for competitors, suppliers, and all the other environment. So let's have a look at this chart here. This is what's called a Porter model of the external environment. Within the diamond figure there, you have competitive rivalry, you have threat of entry, power of buyers, substitutes, and power of suppliers. They're all the main actors in the theatre. So that's where the main business goes on. Outside of that, you have the external environment, and you have what's called the PEST, the political, the economic, the social, and the technological. So they influence the actual competitive rivalry. They don't impact directly, but they do influence it. So let's look at these areas. The industry analysis. As we said, there's competitive rivalry, and that's influenced by the four outer ones there of suppliers, the threat of entry, the power of buyers, and the substitutes. So let's look at those individually. Competitive rivalry. A high rivalry can result from numerous equal competitors, where they're all fighting for business. No one company is gaining market share, and they all have a small area in the business. So it's a very competitive fight. The Japanese call it reciprocal polishing, because they're rubbing up against each other. So just gives you an idea. They see it as a positive thing in creating competition, in making sure efficiency is there. But often if efficiency isn't there, it can result in lowering of prices. Slow industry growth. What was the market growth last year? If it, for example, it was a negative growth, it's contracting, the rivalry will increase. Even if it's a small growth and companies are expanding, the rivalry increases. When rivalry increases, profitability falls. The lack of differentiation and switching costs. By differentiation we mean, what makes your product different from somebody else, or your business different? So what are the components there? If you all look the same from one competitor to another, it makes no difference who they do business with. So you have to try and create differentiation. If it isn't there, it'll increase rivalry. Same with switching costs. If they are low, then it's easy to go from one supplier to another. That'll keep down prices. Fixed costs. If they're high, for example, if machinery is very high or technology had to be bought and it was high, then it's a barrier to entry, and it's a barrier to exit as well, because you can't leave too quickly if you've invested a huge amount of money. So you're looking at these and saying, can I get out? No, I can't. So that keeps people in the marketplace longer than they would like to be, but they have to be in order to try and have an exit strategy. Capacity increase in large increments. So in other words, if you had to buy new machinery, you can only do it in such a way that you have to double or treble what you're doing already. It's very difficult to build up your sales to match that capacity. And if other companies are doing the same thing, the oversupply comes into place very quickly. So they all have to be looked at. Threat of entry. Major sources of barriers to entry, they include things like economies of scale. If, for example, it required a huge amount of money to get into a particular area because of machinery costs, that can be an economies of scale problem and a barrier to entry. Product differentiation, we've talked about that earlier. If they're all the same, the barriers to entry are low. If there's big differences, maybe the customers feel satisfied already, and so that'll act as a barrier to entry. Capital requirements. If there's high capital requirements, that can act as a barrier to entry, particularly for smaller companies. They can't move in as easily and have to make bigger risks in doing so. So that's an element that has to be looked at. Cost disadvantage independent of size. For example, if there was a particular market situation where there was a few dominant people because of what they held, there might be influences there that make disadvantages there independent of size. Access to distribution channels. For example, where I live, the supermarkets, there are 4 major supermarkets. They control 80–85% of the market, a huge amount. And they tell you who the distributors are. And if you can't get in with them, you can't get into the supermarkets. So that acts as a barrier to entry there. And finally, government policy. Is government pro-business, first of all? What are the tax rates like? Are they very high for business or are they lower? What's the policy on employment? Is there high legislation there requiring a lot of looking after people very, very well, or is it lower? All of these sort of things impact on what the barriers are. Substitutes are next. Substitutes effectively limit profits. Why is that? Because if you have an alternative, you can switch to that very easily, and therefore in your business you can't charge as much. That's why they're effectively limiting profits. Stronger if they improve price performance trade-off with the industry product. So in other words, if the substitute was not as cheap, it was more expensive and was only equally as good, it's less attractive, so it works for you. It can work both ways, but it depends on the price, it depends on the quality, things like that. They come from unexpected areas. Like if we think back 10 years and looked at the telephonics industry, looked at the computer industry, we didn't see an emerging of technologies there. And I'm not sure some of the companies outside of, say, Apple saw it either. So we have to be looking at the horizon all the time, seeing what's there. Power of suppliers. The suppliers, they're powerful if there's a concentration of suppliers. What we mean by that is if there's only 2, maybe 3 suppliers, very few, then the concentration is very strong and they are powerful. No substitute products. If companies don't have alternative products to go to, then they're more limited and they have to work within the suppliers that are there. And if you have the concentration of suppliers and you have no substitutes, they're even stronger. Product is an important part of the buyer's product. So in other words, it's a vital component. And if that's the case, then you're in a stronger position. Threats of forward integration. If, for example, you're squeezing your suppliers and they are big and powerful and they say, no, what we're going to do is go in competition with you. And that's where forward integration comes into place. So we look at the threats of that. How likely is that to happen? Probably not very likely, but in some cases, if it's important enough to the supplier, they will do it. And then switching costs. If switching costs are high, then it's not easy to substitute. So you're looking at things like that. Power of the buyers, and how powerful are they? A buyer group is powerful, again, like with suppliers, if there's a concentration of buyers. I mentioned supermarkets earlier in my country, and they are very powerful for that reason, because there's a concentration of power there, and large volumes. Products undifferentiated. If it's easy to jump from one supplier to the other because they're making the exact same component, then there's no difference. You then have to try and create differences in how you service to make the differentiation. But in terms of product, there's no differentiation. Buyer earns low profits. So if they're earning low profits and you're supplying them, they're going to try and squeeze you to give them products at even lower prices because they want to improve their profits. And that's the one way where they can start working. If you take it that, on average, 45% of the cost of a product is raw materials, where do they start? With the suppliers. Product is a major part of the buyer's cost. So, if that's the case, they're going to look at that again for the earlier reason in terms of low profits as being somewhere where they can start trying to make a difference in terms of improving their cost disadvantage. Threats of backward integration. Not as common as forward integration, but still is still there as a threat. That's where the company you're selling to wants to secure their supply of particular raw materials because it's important to them, and they may buy a competitor of yours, and they are then in competition with yourself, and you've lost their business and you still have a more powerful competitor there. Now we look at the remote environment. The political, first of all. As we said earlier, there's different environments in different countries in terms of running businesses and how the politicians look after them. So you're looking at legislation, first of all. You're looking at taxation. You're looking at, is it pro-business, is it not? And different environments in the political field can have different impacts on industry where that is happening. What's the economy like? You're looking at your national economy, you're looking at your regional economy, you're looking at the world economy. How are they all doing? What are the trends like? And if it's getting tighter, the economies, there's low growth, you then have to look in terms of, well, I'm not going to be selling a huge increases in turnover, so I have to look at my business very carefully. The social aspects. Are there social legislation? Is there environmental legislation there in relation to how your business is run? Technological. What are the technological differences that's happening? Are there new technologies coming in? And on the horizon, is there risks of further technology changes? And do you need to keep watching those and see what is happening? Now we come to the SWOT analysis, and what this is about is looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. The strengths and weaknesses, they emerge from the internal analysis, where you've looked at the company, the different aspects like marketing, production, R&D, management, and so on. And you've said, where are we strong, where are we weak? And you're trying to decide, well, how can I improve? And you have to be very honest with yourself when you're doing this, because if you don't, you're only fooling yourself. So look at the strengths and weaknesses of your business and say, yes, we are weak in these areas, and yes, we are strong in these ones, and come out with an accurate picture on that. If you're doing benchmarking, particularly competitiveness benchmarking, that can help you to identify your strengths and weaknesses in a lot more independent way. Opportunities and threats. These emerge from the external analysis, and this is the environmental analysis of the company, the competition, the suppliers, the buyers, and so forth. So from that you get your opportunities and your threats. Threats may come from technology, they may come from increased competition from different areas. It's a matter of working them out and seeing where they're happening. So we can see from the box theory we have strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities. So one way of looking at those is that. A different way is what we call TOEs. That's the same thing, threats, opportunities, weaknesses, and strengths. But what we do in here in TOEs is we take opportunities and strengths, and then taking opportunities by building on strengths, and then in terms of opportunities and weaknesses, build opportunities by eliminating weaknesses. It helps you to focus in on the SWOT analysis a bit more. Threats then and strengths, looking at those, you reduce threats by building on your strengths. And then finally, weaknesses and threats. Reduce threats by eliminating your weaknesses. So it gives you little guides in terms of building up, what do I do from here? Finally, we come to developing your mission objectives. In developing the mission, first of all, a mission is a long-term vision of the company, where you want to be in 10 years' time. It shouldn't change much over the years unless the business has changed significantly, and doesn't need much updating, but it does need to be reviewed every few years to see, is it relevant or not? If it's not relevant, then you change it. If it's still relevant, you leave it. So what should mission statements contain? Types of goods and services provided is one aspect of it. Then you're looking at the existing and potential customers. What type of customers are you dealing with at present? What other types of new customers are there? And can you develop new markets as well? The way the company does business, what it stands for, how it operates. You're also looking at its values and its philosophies. And does it live up to its values? So you're looking at all of those in terms of what the mission statement is. And finally, the basis of competitive advantage. Where do you feel you can gain competitive advantage and be better, and where you're trying to be in 10 years' time, better than other companies? So from that, we then go to the objectives. And there's a short word here called SMART. And that stands for specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. So in other words, that's specific in terms of that it says what it is in the tin. It's very clear and specific. It's not too woolly. Measurable. So it must have some goal that you're trying to achieve. Not just, we want to be the best in the world. That's not an objective, that's an aspiration. So if you want to be the leading company in your country, that's an objective, all right. Actionable, so you must be able to take actions to achieve that objective. It must be realistic, not so far ahead that you'll never achieve it, and not so near that it's too easy to achieve. And it must be time-bound. So, in other words, it has a defined period of 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, but a period, preferably shorter term, that you're looking at. Key areas for objectives. The first one then is market standing. Where are you in terms of the market? Where do you want to be in 3 years' time, 5 years' time? And so you're setting out objectives on market standing. On innovation, what level of innovation is the company going to try and achieve? How much money per year are they going to put into it? With some industries, it might be only 0.5% and you might be a leading company. But with other companies or other industries, if you're using 5%, it might be quite low. So it all depends. Pharmaceuticals would be very high level. Areas like, say, printing would be negligible. Very little innovation going on there. So with a small percentage, you can be a leader very easily. Productivity. So it's looking at how much improvement in productivity are you going to have? What sort of lean activities going on that will improve that productivity? The physical and financial resources. So in other words, the buildings, the machinery, the finances available for the company. And how are they going to be used to make sure that we have what's necessary? You have to look at that in great detail and look at it in terms of the markets, look at it in terms of the innovation, productivity. Like, for example, is new machinery needed? And so on and so forth. And you're looking at those and saying, how can we set objectives or goals that will make that meaningful and smart? Finally, profitability. It is the most important thing because without profits you can't stay in business. So you need to have those profits and be looking at improving your profitability. Profitability does vary from industry to industry, and you have to look at your industry and see what the average profitability is and how do you compare. Again, benchmarking will give you some idea on that. If you carry out benchmarking that is competitively based, you'll get an industry average and give you an idea where you stand. Next, we come to defining strategies. Strategies, they're looked at in different levels. First is generic strategies. They're very basic, broad strategies. Then you have the grand strategies and what's the overall direction of the business going in. And then you have what's called functional strategies. They're things like R&D strategy, marketing strategy, production strategy, and so on. So they're all relevant and they all have a place in making your strategic approach. So you start off with the generic strategies. In this, you have things like cost leadership strategy, where you're trying to be the lowest cost producer. Very difficult to do unless you're a very large company with very sophisticated systems. But depending on the country you're in, depending on the industry you're in, it may be achievable. For certainly smaller companies, a differentiation strategy is usually more in place, and you're looking at how can we differentiate ourselves from the competition and make ourselves look different. And then we're looking at a focus strategy. In that, you're focusing in on part of the overall business, and you're saying, well, how can we make a difference here in this area, in this part of the overall business? Grand strategies are next. As you can see, there's a lot of alternatives of strategies. Very often, companies will mix and match. They have a few strategies for different products. For example, differentiation strategy, or a diversification strategy, where you're saying we're going to move from this business over time. Or vertical integration, where you're going forward and buying maybe customers and moving into that market. Or where you want to focus in on a concentration strategy, where it's focusing in on a certain area of the business rather than the whole business that you're currently in. The more traditional one is expansion strategy, of just doing more of the same, or innovation strategy down the bottom here, where you have looking at developing new products. However, things are working out badly. You might be thinking in terms of a turnaround strategy to try and improve things. And if that fails, then you move to one above that, which is retrenchment, and maybe even divestment or liquidation. All of these are valid strategies. And let's go on then to the functional strategies. The first one is marketing strategies. So you have a functional marketing plan. You have operations strategies, where you have an operations plan and looking at that individually. And then there's R&D strategies. So you have an R&D plan. And then the financial. So what's your financial plan? And finally then we have human resources, where we're looking at the human resources plan and seeing how that ties in with the strategies of the grand strategies and ties in with the objectives and the mission of the business. Then we come to finally the implementation and action plans. So, implementation. You have 4 boxes here: success, risque or ruin, failure or trouble. And depending on whether your strategy is implemented excellent or poor, whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, will decide on where you are with that. So you have to look at each of these. Success, targets for growth, shares, profits are met. Or if it's good execution, may save a poor strategy or may hasten failure. And then failure, cause of failure, hard to disagree, poor strategy, marked by inability to execute. And then trouble, poor execution, hampers good strategy, may be concluded as inappropriate. So you have to look at all of those things. And then you have to look at your action plan in terms of set out the objectives of the company, and also to define the functional strategies to achieve each objective. They all have to tie in. So ultimately then, you write down the actions required to each objective and who's it done by and when, with target lines associated, and check for conflicts between objectives and strategies. Thank you very much.